So when I was a kid, we used to play this game in the schoolyard, and one kid would go up to another kid and would say, "I won the sandbox," and the second kid would say, "I two the sandbox." The first kid would say, "I three the sandbox. I four the sandbox. I five the sandbox. I six the sandbox. I seven the sandbox." And finally, some lucky kid got to say, "I ate the sandbox." And then everyone else would be, "Wow, you ate the sandbox? That's crazy." So that was very hilarious to a 5-year-old. And so today, this week, we will eat the proverbial sandbox. And this is the 8th week of the Force of Life count. And I just wanted to say that because isn't counting a kind of a wonderful thing? We don't tend to think about it, but it's something we learn how to do that has a real, just it feels good to count. Do you remember counting the first time you ever counted to 100? I do. I was very excited. It was almost like ringing a bell. If you grew up watching, say, Sesame Street, do you remember the song 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12? If you're my age, then you'll remember these crazy like disco animations with pinballs and stuff. And counting is counting feels good, and counting creates these intervals we that we almost sit in at each point. There is something gratifying about moving through the number series. And this week, in the Tree of Life diagram, we have reached Hood. And Hood means splendor. It is the polar opposite of Netzach, which means victory. And I don't know what your experience with Netzach has been specifically, but I can say a little bit about how Hood almost naturally comes out of it. You may be noticing already now that each week has this type of an arc where it starts to build in the early part and it'll peak, usually around Monday, and then it'll start to move towards the next week. And we can analyze this like Gebser did into efficient phase, climax, and deficient phase, where that energy is coming up and it's operating very efficiently, and then it attains supremacy, if you will. It rings its bell. And then what happens is the side effects of the success of that energy start to manifest, and the requirement for another energy to rise up and essentially process or metabolize those side effects emerges. So by now, if you've been following along week by week, you will notice that every week the energy emerges, peaks, and then it starts to fade as the next one kind of comes in and starts to metabolize it and starts to grow. So today, this week, Hood is officially born, but I've been feeling it coming out of the Netzach energy. And what's Netzach? Netzach is 7. It's victory. It's noise. It's overabundance. It's a fiery, hot sphere in the sense that it's full of activity and full of wildness and full of noise. And then it heads towards Hood, which in a way, being the sphere of the intellect or the wits, the intelligence, cools that noise and teases signal out of it. So probably already you found the initial overwhelming vibe of Netzach, of the 7s, has started to shift, to move towards a more cooler or a more comprehensive kind of vibe. And part of what the number 8 does, and part of what Hood does, is it is responsible for sealing all the gaps. Sealing is a very important idea in geometry, and in combinatoria, and in masonry, and in magic. We seal all the broken gaps, if you will, in our temple. So eight refers to this almost process of overcoating. You heard, of course, of Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great. Hermes is said to be the inventor of the alphabet, the god of language, and also the patron of alchemy and Hermeticism. When we seal something hermetically, it means we cover every single angle, every single escape angle. In fact, we're pressurizing it. And we're using language to pressurize and, in a sense, condense it. And if you think of these things like when you look at grimoires or occult texts, you see they're filled with seals. And those seals are meant to contain certain kinds of energy. So if you look at a grimoire, particularly, say, the Lemegeton or the Goetia, which has got these demons that really are modeled after the jinn, the genies of Arabic folklore, and they're sealed inside of vessels. So in the Goetia myth, they're sealed inside of a brass vessel. In the genie myths, they're sealed inside of a bottle. And there's another myth, Jung cites it. He talks about the myth of Mercurius and the young man who opens a bottle, and out comes Mercurius, the mischievous spirit, and it wreaks havoc on his life until he can coerce it back into the bottle. And this idea of opening and closing seals, of releasing pressure and capturing pressure, is very important to operations of deliberation and control. So when we build any kind of, say, plumbing system, or any kind of system that takes a flow, we have to seal all the joints so that the pressure flows through it without loss, right? So this applies both to a digital circuit as well as an actual literal waterworks, plumbing, as well as to magical flows. Magical flows need a canalized system, a canalization through which the energies flow. And of course, this is a canal system that flows the energy from the Ein Sof through all these channels, which are, in our ritual experience, are formally sealed with words and names and meditations, and then becomes a kind of container for awareness. And this is also applies to other systems like the chakras, where they open up and there is a sort of an initiation process. I won't necessarily say they're being all sealed up because it's a different idiom, but from my point of view, the activation of Hod means the activation of intelligence, means the activation of awareness. Whereas Netzach is desire, the sevens represent desire, the eights represent magic and wits and intelligence, and particularly the use of language. So for the adept, if you will, operating out of Hod, there is a desire to create a kind of a sound and complete system for any given set of symbols, be they the runes, be they the Hebrew letters, tarot, Enochian, I Ching, whatever it is, there is usually this desire to have a kind of complete suite that covers all the angles of human psychology. Now, definitely there are some more porous systems. Like, let's take, for example, a divinatory system. If you're using a divinatory system like the tarot, and you've got a deck, and you shuffle that deck, you can get one of 78 cards in it. So if all the cards are in the deck, you can get any one of these 78 scenarios that are part of the world model, right, that this represents. It's been said that a divinatory system is essentially a record of the epistemology of a culture. That means the body of knowledge of a culture. And so if this is a complete deck, then you are going to get you're going to have access to every single possible category in the culture. It's complete. Now, imagine you're shuffling cards and you're doing a reading, and you draw a card and you have never seen it before, and it is not in the tarot. It's like the 19 of turkeys, and you don't know where it came from. And you count your deck and you realize, hold on a minute, there's this other card that's been inserted into it. That would represent an unsound finding, right? It's not part of the system. It's irrelevant. It's a piece of noise. It's a piece of an absurdity that has occurred within the system. It's not generated by the system. It would be even more obvious in a system like the I Ching, which is mathematically produced. If a 65th hexagram suddenly popped up, that can't happen because the basis of it gives us 64, no more, no less. If you don't have 64, then it's incomplete. If you have something that its axioms cannot produce, a 65th or 69th or whatever, then it is unsound. So soundness and completeness is actually logician's language. And soundness and completeness represent the two attributes that a system needs in order to be axiomatized. An axiomatized system means that you can look at a logical system and see that all the basic presuppositions in that system will bear all the possible fruit that they can and only the possible fruit that they can. An axiomatized system is sound and complete, it's closed, it's hermetically sealed. I highly recommend a really brilliant book called Logicomics, and it's about the philosophical quest to axiomatize mathematics that was in the early 20th century. It was a major endeavor. Bertrand Russell was a huge proponent of it. And it's a very interesting story because they were trying to show that mathematics was a sound and complete system. They were trying to seal it all off. Then there was this guy named Kurt Gödel. And Kurt Gödel essentially proved that there is a statement inside of math that's provable only if it's unprovable, and it's unprovable only if it's provable. In other words, he kind of found the equivalent of the liar's paradox. Everything I say is a lie. He found that in math. And so it shows that math cannot be axiomatized. It cannot be sealed off. There's something fundamentally porous about mathematics. Now let's get back to 8. 8 has this coding capacity, this desire to code, to close, to control. And there are many ways that this is done. It acts as a way of filtering noise into signal so that we can have comprehension. This is part of the transition from 7 to 8, is that out of this wild rush of passions and abundances, this cooling effect occurs where we can get a certain sense, a certain orientation. And speaking of orientations, it's probably quite clear that the number 8 produces a compass. So the 8 points of the compass show the full sort of extent of the division of the circle up to, I guess, 2 degrees of articulation, right? So you got it in 4 and then 8. And then, of course, this can go further. But 8 has this powerful kind of orienteering feel to it. And so the 8s in the deck, let's look at the 8s in the deck before we go too far into my cue cards. The 8s in the deck, the Lord of Swiftness, quick action, decision, communication, requires a sense of direction, sense of orientation. The Lord of Abandonment, there's a journey. There's a person walking away from an opportunity. Perhaps it's because he knows where he's going, and this opportunity is not en route. This is walking away from an investment of some sort or an opportunity. And the Eight of Swords. This I've heard called interference in the Crowley deck. It's an image of a person who's captured. I find the thing that I find very interesting about this card is, it's long been pointed out that she could free herself by cutting her bonds on the sharp swords around her. But I think the real hazard here is the very slippery ground that she's standing on. She's standing on basically I guess a shoal or a shoreline. That's a rocky shoreline, and she's standing amongst swords on a shoal, and it's probably during low tide. So she's got a limited amount of time, so she actually has to move very slowly and carefully. There needs to be a real understanding of deliberateness to disentangle yourself from this. You just can't escape immediately. You have to treat it delicately. So there's a sense of delicacy and orientation required here. And then finally, of course, there is one of my favorite cards is the Lord of Prudence, or Apprenticeship. And this fellow is making many copies of a pentacle, getting it right. This is a direction of learning. This is the card of practice, the card of diligent and careful work. And this also requires an orientation, a knowing of where you're going, a commitment to a journey. So I would say that all of these eights involve a commitment of some sort, and a commitment that's decided on, that's calculated. So it has a really good sense of choice involved in this. Just as the sevens have a confusion to them, the eights have a clarity to them. And I said in the previous video that one of the things that happens when you go from odd numbers to even numbers to odd numbers to even numbers, and you express them as mathematical figures, is you get asymmetrical, and then symmetrical, and then asymmetrical, and symmetrical, and then asymmetrical, and symmetrical. And the odd numbers are asymmetrical. They have an orientation where they can be up and down, and the even numbers, such as 6 and 4, can be arranged however. So if you have two forms of the pentacle, right? The pentagram can face up or face down, but one form of the hexagram, I mean, you can put it on its side, we won't lie, but usually, if it, the hexagram, you don't, it's symmetrical. And the heptagram, of course, is asymmetrical, so it has this polarity, because the 6th or the 7th point that was in the hexagram has been displaced to the perimeter to form the heptagram. And so the heptagram, of course, has implicit within itself an eighth point at its heart. And so what happens is that eighth point is then displaced the perimeter, and we get the octagram. And the octagram is one of my favorite signs. And here is an image of the octagram. And so my homework to you following this is just learn how to draw one of these. I find it a bit challenging. I've got this, my light adjustment. I'm not using my phone for this video. I'm using my laptop, and yeah, so it's making decisions about the lighting, but so it goes. This is the octagram, and so this seals all 8 directions of the compass point. So you're really able to start to conceive of a world here. And I made a so learn how to do this. Learn how to draw an octagram. It will prove useful when working with later exercises. Okay, so we've got this 8-point directional compass, this 8-point star that we can imagine ourselves seated in. And in the 7th week, I talked about how the 7 days are the week, right? The 7 days seal the week with meaning. So there's something that can be said for the 8th, because the 8th has a capacity to seal the whole year. And for those of you who follow the pagan Wiccan traditions, or the traditions from the traditional pagan traditions from England, there is an 8-fold wheel of the year. There are 8 fire festivals that occur at even intervals throughout the year. Okay, so here's where I'm going to step back and let those of you who are involved in the pagan community take over, because I go to the festivals and I'll hang out, but I'm not. I don't live in the West. I live in Hong Kong, and so this is something that I haven't focused on, the wheel of the year, but I admire it, and I see it as a sealing of the year with a narrative of meaning. So you can definitely see how this connects, and anything that works in 8s will connect to this. So the runic system will connect to this. The ohms connect to this. There is a great deal of work that's been done. So like if you're interested in this is somewhere you can explore. But this is a coding of the year in the 8s, where the week is coded in the 7s. So I think that's a kind of elegant thing. I will say this. I tend to focus on the solstices and equinoxes. So if this is, say, the winter solstice, then this is the spring equinox. Actually, this is how I would do it. Spring equinox, the start of the year. Winter solstice, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumnal equinox, and winter solstice. And these are like real physical points in time and space, right? So the seasons, depending on where in the earth, the seasons experientially, winter, summer, fall, that'll depend, weather-wise, right? Some people say the spring is when it gets warm, so that might be if you're in Newfoundland in June or July, or it might be in February if you're in Hong Kong. But technically speaking, the spring, summer, fall, and winter occur when triggered by the equinoxes and solstices. So basically, here's the sun, and the Earth is at a tilt, right? And it's like this. And say the northern hemisphere, at this point where it is closest to the sun, that's the summer solstice. And then it comes around, and this point at which it's side on is the fall equinox. And this point where the northern hemisphere is furthest away from the sun, this is the winter solstice. And then it comes around, side on again, spring equinox, summer solstice, autumnal equinox, winter solstice. Now, of course, it's opposite for the southern hemisphere, right? So in Australia, the summer solstice is actually the winter solstice, and the winter solstice is the summer solstice. So the winter in Australia is the summer in Canada, and vice versa, because of this essentially cosmological fact. So there are four points, and so the other 8 are simply smack dab in the middle of it, and we have 8 fire festivals to celebrate them, thus circulating the narrative through time. We're essentially chronoforming time with the 7 and the 8. We're producing a world in which we can inhabit that's full of meaning and story, and we've sealed off the short term and the long term, or the year isn't really long term, but the midterm, if you will. We sealed them off between 7 and 8. So what about over here in Hong Kong? So the Chinese have been working their magic for a very long time, and is very logical and consistent language. The I Ching, which many of you are familiar with, is a geomantic oracle. And remember, I said that an oracle isn't just a way of divining the future. It is essentially the catalog of the epistemology of a people. Tarot is a catalog, an index to a catalog, in fact, a catalog of memories, of stories, of ways of knowing. Well, so is the I Ching. And the I Ching is essentially based on these 8 trigrams. So the Tao gives forth a yin and a yang. A yin is a broken line, darkness, shadow, and a yang is an unbroken line, brightness. And you imagine a mountain, there's a shadowy side and a dark side. That's where it originally comes from. And over the course of the day, the shadowy side will become the light side, and the light side will become the shadowy side. That's what yin and yang mean, light and darkness. And they phase around phenomenon. Phenomenon pass through stages of light and darkness. Just so when you see the yin-yang symbol, there's a seed of yin inside the yang and a seed of yang inside the yin, because they're constantly becoming into one another. Well, the Tao is essentially the mountain. And it gives forth these dual qualities, and then these dual qualities combine into bigrams. There's 4 bigrams, and then there's 8 trigrams, and then the trigrams themselves. So the trigrams are basically combinations. If you imagine here, you've got 3 positions: a below, a middle, and above, right? So we can think of these 3, the mind in the gut, the mind in the heart, the mind in the head. These three key positions through which the world can be seen, or heaven, earth, and consciousness. Or you can even imagine the 2 lobes of an hourglass, and the aperture in the center. So that's what these 3 positions are. And the middle position, of course, is the bridge position. And so here are all the possible combinations of yin and yang. So you've got yang, 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 yin, yin, yin. This is heaven, this is earth. You've got, normally we read from the bottom up, okay? So here is yang, yang, yin. This is called lake, the joyous. And notice that across from it is yin, yin, yang. So this and this, these are mutually opposites. If you changed all the lines here into the opposite, it would become here. This is mountain. Mountain, the lake, the joyous. Mountain, the still. And over here, we've got wind, the subtle and penetrating, which is assigned to magicians. And thunder, the shocking and the sudden. And again, these are complements, right? So there are 4 pairs of complementary opposites. And then this is the fire, the clinging, because it clings to its fuel. And water, the abysmal, because it seeks the lowest point and creates chasms. And so these 8 seal all the basic phenomena of the world. So if you realize that you're talking about a code, and if this is indeed a catalog of all that can be perceived in the ancient Chinese cosmos. I mean, it's not just as simple as this, but this is a key to it all. This is called the Bagua, 8 directions, the 8 directional compass or furnace. This is the great metabolizer of thought, according to a consistent axiomatic logic. So this is there's a martial art called Bagua that's all based off of this. It's an internal art. There's so much related to the Bagua. If I combine this, I can combine these, trigrams with each other, and there are 64. That gives us the 64 hexagrams. Interestingly enough, cell biology on the planet tends to really resonate with the I Ching. When an egg is fertilized, it splits into 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then becomes 64. And there's 64 cells. This is basically any animal on the planet. It's called a cytoplast. And the cytoplast is a ball of 64 cells. And then it forms a divot in the top and bottom and a donut shape. Basically, a hole forms in it. And it's a donut. Becomes a torus. And that's the digestive tract, the mouth and anus. So basically, any animal forms in the same way that the I Ching forms. And I found that very, very fascinating. And also 64 hexagrams, 64 DNA codons. There's a lot of parallel to cellular biology and to the biological in this highly logical and beautiful system. So why am I bringing it up here in the context of a discussion of the tarot? Because we don't have to study the I Ching. It's its own thing. But I want to give it an example as an incredibly sealed off space. I mean, it's a memory palace that is highly sealed, hermetically sealed, if you will. And so Hermes has always been associated with this sphere. So Hermes would certainly love the I Ching. Leibniz, the great philosopher and inventor of binary, was aware of the I Ching and very much fascinated by it. And whether or not it played a role in the development of binary, we don't know. I would say probably. But we know he had a copy of the I Ching. So, where are we? We've talked about the Bagua. We've talked about the 8-fold wheel of the year. So I want to talk about how in this sphere we are essentially cooling down perception by giving things names, by discovering how to essentially call them and arrange them using name and form. And this is what the magician does. So this is the sphere of the magician. And we talked about invocation last week in the 7th sphere. Invocation is the process of calling a god into yourself. So we use the deities surrounding the year, or sorry, not the year, we use the deities surrounding the week. So Mars for Tuesday, Frigga or Aphrodite for Friday, and so on. And by invoking them, we let the gods see through us, so they partake of our consciousness and we partake their consciousness. Gods being essentially infinite awareness, segueing into the whole. So this is invocation, when you draw the divine awareness through yourself and you allow it to grow in balance. That's the real important thing about invocation. You got to do it in balance. You can't leave something out. You get all warped and stuff, and you don't want that, right? You leave out Saturn because you're afraid of death or whatever, and then you'll end up with a psychocosm that is deformed in some way. So you do need to invoke in a balanced way. When we come to Hood, we can start talking about evocation. And evocation is calling a being outside yourself. So at this point, we've created a circle. We're aware of the circle. We've called the divine awarenesses into the octahedron that is inside of the circle. But there is the issue of what is outside the circle. We've been focusing on the inside of the circle. What about beings that are partial, that we do not want to admit into our circle? Now, on the final, ultimate, level of analysis, if you will, God is a circle whose center is everywhere and periphery is infinite. Then there is an everything is everything kind of interdependence. But as a contingent being, everything is a bad way to live your life. It's a way to get exploited, destroyed, devoured. If everything is everything, then, I'll be quite happy being eaten by a wolf, which you see in The Fool sometimes. The Fool is being eaten by a crocodile in the Crowley version, because the Fool is in this, like, everything is everything kind of, whoa, yo, cosmic unity. Well, the thing about cosmic unity is there's terrible consequences for any contingent embodied being to allow yourself to dissolve, right? So not that, it's one of those things. How do we retain our particularity to continue our work, not out of fear, but out of respect for this opportunity, for this vessel? We have to keep certain things out of the circle, right? The scammers, right? Oh, the Nigerian prince, well, everything is everything, we better, help him out. Yeah, I know that it's just, some scam artist, but I'm gonna let him. No, we don't let scam artists come in and violate our space. We have to set boundaries, and that's what evocation is about. Evocation is about setting boundaries, particularly when there are entities that, on the contingent level, will threaten your being. So what do? We keep them outside of the circle. What if they want to get into the circle? Well, then we can buffer it. And remember, we're moving over back to the left-hand side of the tree. So we're right under Geburah. Geburah is 5. 5 is the pentagram. The pentagram traditionally is used as a kind of a ward. So you could, if you had, a negative energy coming towards you, you can visualize a pentagram going out to the point of your circle and warding it so that nothing can get in. Because anything that tries to pass through the pentagram will be analyzed into its elements. It'll be turned back into energy. It will not pass that barrier. So, how do you summon the pentagram? Traditionally, there's names of God associated to it. I would say use the Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas mantra. It will create a pentagram. Remember, we've seen this in a previous week. The diagram, do I have it here? I may not have it right immediately on hand, but the fivefold pattern of Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas is very pentagramizable, in which case you can use it to generate a pentagram, which will then ward your circle. But by all means, do your independent research. It takes some finesse, I think, to get to the point where you really understand and have confidence that's what you're doing. And you need to have confidence that your word is laying out a structure, a law, if you will. But you can use Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas, both to ward the 4 points or individually at any of the points, visualizing either a square with a cross through it or a pentagram. And we're not going to formally invoke spirits in this week, but let's say there are lots of entities around in the universe that will be attracted to a magician's circle, and being able to communicate with them over that boundary, with having that boundary in place, is important. So what would this mean in a magical sense, in a more kind of metaphorical sense? It's actually obvious. We do it all the time. When we talk to another person, while assuming that that other person is a separate entity from ourselves, we're doing evocation, right? When we call up a plumber to do work, we are essentially hiring. We're summoning a spirit. Using the number. You phone the number. It's the means of summoning that being, right? Perhaps the phone book from back in the day is a grimoire, right? You get the code and you summon the person, and then the person comes, the spirit comes and does the work that you ask them to do. And sometimes there's some dodginess, so you have to be careful. You have to set boundaries, right? Maybe it's a dodgy contractor, so there's all sorts of stuff. So in a way, the process of evocation can be modeled as just dealing with other people. So I don't actually want to get too far into practicing that in this course. If, of course, you want to experiment with that, there are books called grimoires. This one is the famous or rather infamous one, the Lemegeton. It's got the Goetia, the 72 demons. They are very powerful and they are very disruptive, and you need to have a lot of confidence and a lot of competence, being aware of what resources you have, how to hold your circle, how to call their bluff, and all these kinds of things. In order to handle something like that, they're very, very volatile spirits. But there are reasons why it's important to sort of deal with that. There's other kinds of spirits. There are what we call egregores, which is a group consciousness. So it could be fairly said that any group that gets together that thinks alike produces an egregore. So there would certainly be an egregore of say of a political party. Arguably in the States, you've got the donkey and the elephant. Those are like egregores. And there can be a group mind or egregore. So those can also be dealt with. They're not quite spirit entities, or I don't know. I've never evoked one. But the main thing is evocation happens outside the circle. Invocation happens inside the circle. And once you've got the eightfold ward, you're really prepared to have this boundary between other and self. And it's good to have that, because that's how we stay essentially sane. If that boundary collapses, if you start invoking or seeing through, allowing partial entities to see through your eyes and so on, there are distortions that will occur. And typically you don't want to do that. An entity is usually evoked into a triangle. That's certainly the Solomonic way of doing it. A triangulation is a type of, imprisonment in a sense. We're going to, in a moment, I'm going to suggest a visualization. It won't be as elaborate as last week with a full meditation, but I am going to suggest a meditation. But before we do that, before we do that, I want to talk about the octahedron. Okay, so we're going to talk about the octahedron. Before I do, I just wanted to add a thought. I live here in Hong Kong, which was a British colony off the south coast of China, and now it is a special administrative region of China. But it's culturally, part of the south of China, and the religious traditions here follow the eightfold year. So we always know that it's a solstice or an equinox or one of the midpoints because there's Chinese festivals. So it's not just the Wiccan wheel of the year. The Chinese do follow the eightfold wheel of the year, and they have others as well. But that's just an interesting point to note. And of course, 8 is a hugely revered number here for a number of reasons. 88 is ba, butts up ba, or ba ba, which means father. And yeah, anyway, I want to talk about the octahedron. And what I want to show you, we're going to do a little meditation. We're going to do two meditations this week, actually, but they're going to be shorter than last week's. So first and foremost, I want to introduce you to our old friend, the triangular number. This is the triangular number of 7. So you remember that triangular numbers are basically, if you had spheres, you could put them, arrange them, spheres of number n in different patterns. So there are triangular numbers, there's square numbers, there's hexagonal numbers, there's star numbers. In this case, the triangular number of the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 is 28. And 28 is a very important number. Mathematicians will tell you it's a perfect number. It has properties that are very rare. 6 shares that. 6 is a perfect number, and so it's 496, but those are the first 3 perfect numbers. I forget the exact definition off the top of my head, so I won't go into that. But the point is that 28 has a real power to it. And it's certainly used in calendars. Again, I'm not going to go into the detail right now. But what I want to show you is actually how the Venus calendar that we're using to time this entire project, this entire course, is tracks the orbit of Venus in 224-day periods. So Venus has a 224.7 day, 7 Earth day orbital period, which means that what I do is I treat it as 32 weeks, right? 7 times 32 is 224, 10 times, and then I add an extra week to make up that 0.7, and that's how it calibrates itself. So 224 is the number of days in this course that we're doing together. And 224 is, of course, 32 divided by 32 times 7, but it is also 8 times 28, which means that if we imagine this figure, and we had 8 of these, we would have 224 little circles. So this is an octahedron where each face is a triangular mesh of 28 points. And we're going to see these as lamps. So what I'd like you to do is just take a moment, and we're going to breathe, and we're going to do a little meditation where we relax, clear our minds, breathing in from above and below into the center and out to the 4 directions, and visualizing the octahedron around us. Remembering that the 22 points of the octahedron, the 7 corners, 6 corners in the center, and the 3 paths through the center, as well as the 12 paths along the edges, bring the entirety of the 22 major arcana into a crystal in the center of our circle. I want you to be aware of that circle, and as the energy drawing the breath in and out along 4 streams, circulating the energy through our circle as that octahedron becomes clearer and filled with life. And I want you to choose a face of the octahedron. One of the upper faces, one of the 4 faces that connects to the zenith point. And I want you to, as you gaze at that face, realize that there are 28 lamps to be lit on that face in 7 rows. Go up to the top and light the first lamp. Go to the second row and light the second 2 lamps. Go to the third row and light the 3 lamps. And light the 4 lamps. And light the 5 lamps. And light the 6 lamps. And light the 7 lamps. And have a look at that face of the octahedron. Now has 28 lamps that are lit and shining brightly in a triangle across its surface. Now turn your gaze to a second face, also in the upper half of the octahedron. Go up to the top and light the first lamp. And then light the second row, 2 lamps. And then 3 lamps. And then 4 lamps. And then 5 lamps. And then 6 lamps. And then 7 lamps. And return your seat of consciousness to the center of the octahedron, being aware that 2 of the faces are now fully lit up, each with 28 lamps in a triangular mesh, shining. Turn to the third face, the upper part of the octahedron. Light 1 lamp. Light 2 lamps. Light 3 lamps. Light 4 lamps. And light 5 lamps. And light 6 lamps. And light 7 lamps. And from the center of the octahedron, you can see that 3 of the upper faces are all lit up, each with 28 golden shining lamps. And take the 4th upper face and light 1 lamp. And light 2 lamps. And light 3 lamps. And light 4 lamps. And light 5 lamps. And light 6 lamps. And light 7 lamps. Being aware of yourself in the center of the octahedron, know that the entire upper half of the octahedron is now illuminated with 28 lamps on each of the faces. So turn your consciousness to the lower part of the octahedron, the nadir point. Pick a face, going from the nadir up towards the central plane. Light 1 lamp. Light 2 lamps. Light 3 lamps. Light 4 lamps. Light 5 lamps. Light 6 lamps. light 7 lamps, shining on the 5th face of the octahedron. Now, the upper half of the octahedron is all lit up, and one of the faces of the lower half has 28 lamps, all gleaming, shining. And from the center of the octahedron, turn your awareness to the second of the lower faces, starting from the nadir up, lighting 1 lamp, and 2 lamps, and 3 lamps, and 4 lamps, and 5 lamps, and 6 lamps, and 7 lamps. And the 6th face of the octahedron is now brilliantly lit up with 28 lamps. Being aware of yourself in the center of the octahedron, turning your awareness to the 7th face, starting from the nadir, lighting 1 lamp, and then 2 lamps, and then 3 lamps, and then 4 lamps, and then 5 lamps, and then 6 lamps, and then 7 lamps. Being aware from the center, 6, 7 faces of the octahedron have been all lit up. There's just 1 face remaining, and turn your awareness from the center to that last face, starting from the nadir upwards, lighting 1 lamp, and then 2 lamps, and then 3 lamps, and then 4 lamps, and then 5 lamps, and then 6 lamps, and then 7 lamps, completing the octahedron, completing the 8th face, all lit up with 28 lamps. Each of the 8 faces all lit up with 28 lamps. 224 lamps, all shining. 224 days, all lit up. The octahedron sealed with light and energy and love and integrity. The octahedron. Give thanks and allow that octahedron to shrink to the size of an atom, to be stored in your heart, or to fade as you become aware of the world around you. And that is the lighting of the 224 lamps of the octahedron. So you can see that the Venus calendar is shaped like an octahedron. So here in the sphere of Hood, we can find ourselves in non-linear contact with each one of the days that we have invested into this practice. So from a linear perspective, we are on the 8th week, which means that we are, by the end of this week, we are going to have 2 of those faces completely lived through. And yet we are in contact with all of them. So you can imagine yourself at any given point, at any given station, at any given lamp. Imagine your own awareness being present there and share those moments, both those in the past and those to come, with each other. And this will give you a perspective on time that is perhaps a little different than you're used to. Again, the octahedron at the center of the circle. Okay, so now that we have formally activated the octahedron with all 224 lights, paying careful attention to the faces, we can feel how this energy house or energy construct is charged, both the stream of energy that comes from above down to the central square, and the energy that comes from below up to the central square. So you can really imagine that charging up. And every time we practice this, as well as the 22 major arcana along the octahedra, we're essentially charging this this jewel or stone. Okay, so I love how my coffee machine just like, I haven't had a coffee for like an hour, and it's decided, you know, I'm gonna do a process. So it's doing a process. Okay, is it done? Okay, cool. It's like a robot. I don't even know if you guys can hear it, but I can. Right. There's one last thing I want to cover, and part of doing this type of magical work involves using magical languages. And of course, one of the key major magical languages that we use is the Hebrew language, because every letter is also a number, which means that not only can you do a type of numerology where you get a number and find out what words associate to it, or get a word and find out what its number is, you can resonate specific numbers with specific words called formula. And I want to introduce a formula that I know it comes out of Crowley's Thelema. It's an 8-letter formula. The formula is Makashana. The word is Makashana. This is the Hebrew spelling of Makashana. Mem, Aleph, Kaf, Aleph, Shin, Aleph, Nun, He. Makashana. And Makashana is an 8-letter word, which means that it can be spelt around the octahedron. And so you can see here, I have I've placed it at these 8 points. Mem, Aleph, Kaf, Aleph, Shin, Aleph, Nun, He. So when I resonate Makashana, I am producing the octagram around the circle. Why are we doing this? This is to essentially create the fortified circle. We're going to use the Makashana formula to create a very discrete boundary between within and without, and drawing in this 8-fold kind of orientation energy. Transliterated into English, it looks like this, right? Ma, ka, sha, na, and on and on and on. So this is a powerful word for evoking this. What we're going to do in this meditation as well is we are going to visit each of these points, and I will call out the direction, and we are going to call the Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas formula, which will produce a pentagram. So what I will suggest that you do is, as you resonate that word, imagine a pentagram fortifying that position. So we'll have 8 pentagrams, the 8 directions, and then those directions themselves will be coded with the formula Makashana. And outside the circle, what we're going to do is we're going to, at each one of these points, visualize a tetrahedron, which is to say a four-sided triangular object. Let's have a look here. Do I have my little platonic solids? Love my platonic solids. Yeah. So we've got an octahedron at the center, and then there's going to be at each of the 8 points a tetrahedron. Don't worry about what's in that tetrahedron. At this point, we're going to vibrate the letters inside of them. So the mem is going to be inside of a tetrahedron, the aleph, and so on. So these 8 tetrahedra are going to be spaced around the points of the octagram outside the circle. So the octahedron will be inside, and then the octagram will trace out the 8 cardinal points, and then the tetrahedra will be at those points. And you can just picture them fixed or floating around, but that's what we're going to do. So lastly, why Makashana? What does it mean? Makashana is an 8-letter word, and it totals 418. And so maybe you are familiar with this number, maybe you are not. 418 is a very powerful number. It connects to the word abrahadabra and also the name of the goddess Pallas Athena. This is essentially the energetic calling card for Pallas Athena. Pallas Athena is the inventor of among other things, geometry, the bridle, the boat. She's the patron goddess of Athens, obviously, and she is the inventor of the chariot. So Makashana is one way of vibrating this number. There are others, and we will encounter them again. But we're going to use Makashana to create an 8-fold array of energies with octahedron in the center and 8 tetrahedra on the outside of the circle. Okay, so I assume you've taken whatever break you need to take, and we're going to do a short meditation. I want you to breathe. Breathe in from above and below, and out through the 4 cardinal directions. And center your awareness and orienting yourself towards the east in your mind. It doesn't have to be physical. You can, in your mind, orient your awareness towards the east. The place of dawn. Being aware that around you is the octahedron, all lit up, 224 lamps. Coursing with the 22 energies of the major arcana, integrated and intelligent. and see outside yourself, outside of the octahedron, a great circle. And as you face east, know that there are 8 points on that circle, like 8 gates, 8 angles, 8 directions. Seated in the center of your octahedron, facing east, become aware of the point or gate on the circle that is behind you and to the left, in the northwest. Turn your awareness to that point, to that gate. Call forth the pentagram toward that gate. Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. You now control the gate in the northwest. Look out through that gate, and you will see a tetrahedron made of crystal, made of light. And in that tetrahedron, I want you to imagine the energy of the letter Mem. The tetrahedron in the northwest is now filled with the energy of the letter Mem. Become aware of that tetrahedron and withdraw your awareness back into the center of the circle, seeing the pentagram at the northwest point, which seals the gate. And now, from the center, being aware of your octahedron and the circle around you and the pentagram behind you and to the left, turn your awareness directly in front of you to the circle, to the gate, the east. And call forth the pentagram toward the gate of the east. Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. The gate of the east is warded, and look out through it, and you will see a crystalline tetrahedron of light. Imagine the energy of the Aleph entering into that, charging that tetrahedron. The tetrahedron to the east is now brilliant with light, charged with the Aleph energy. Withdraw your consciousness through the eastern gate, being aware of the pentagram, and reassemble your awareness, your seat of consciousness in the very center, knowing that the gate to the northwest is sealed with a pentagram and contains a tetrahedron, the mem in it, and the gate to the east is sealed with a pentagram and contains, outside the circle, a tetrahedron with an aleph in it. And from the center, turn your awareness behind you and to the right, to the southwest. Become aware of the gate to the southwest, sealing it with the pentagram. Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. The southwest gate is now sealed with a pentagram, and you can peer your awareness out through it. And on the outside of the circle, you see a tetrahedron, crystalline, made of light. And into that tetrahedron, call the energy of the letter Kaf. The letter Kaf shines into and illuminates and charges the tetrahedron behind you to the right in the southwest. And being aware of that energy, withdrawing your consciousness back through the southwestern gate, knowing that the pentagram wards it, and into the center, resting your consciousness in the center, seeing the pentagrams to the northwest, behind you and to the left, to the east, in front of you, to the southwest, behind you and to the right. The letters Mem, Aleph, and Kaf, glowing in tetrahedra. And turn your awareness to the north. The gate at the north, seal it. Sator repo tenet opera rotas. Pentagram sealing the gate to the north, peering your awareness out through it. Gazing on the crystalline tetrahedron made of light, charging it with the energy of the letter Aleph, and feeling that tetrahedron brimming with Aleph energy towards the north, drawing your awareness back through the gate, through the pentagram, to the center, being aware of the pentagrams, 4 of them now. Behind you, to the left, in front of you, behind you to the right, and directly to your left. And from the center, turn your awareness to the gate in front of you and to the right in the southeast. Sealing the gate. Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. Gleaming pentagram in front of you, to the right, in the southeast. And peek out through the center, gazing on a crystalline tetrahedron made of light, charging it, the energy of the letter Shin. A gleaming tetrahedron outside the circle, gleaming with Shin energy, and draw your awareness back through the pentagram to the southeast and into the center, knowing that now 5 of the gates have been sealed with pentagrams. 5 of the tetrahedra have been charged with the letters Mem, Aleph, Kaf, Aleph, and Shin. And turning your awareness behind you to the west, sealing the gate of the west, Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas. The gleaming pentagram, and peering out through the western gate of the circle onto a crystalline tetrahedron made of light, and charging it with the energy of the letter Aleph. Just feeling the Aleph energy shining out of the tetrahedron behind you to the west, drawing your awareness back through the pentagram and into the center, knowing that there are now 6 pentagrams around you, to the northwest, to the east, to the southwest, to the north, to the southeast, and to the west. And in each of those points outside the circle are gleaming tetrahedra filled with energy and light. And turn your awareness in front of you to the left, to the northeastern gate of the circle, and seal it. Sator Arepo Tenet Opera Rotas. Peeking out the center of the pentagram and gazing on the outside of the circle on a crystalline tetrahedron made of light. Charge it with the energy of the letter Nun. Feel the energy of the letter Nun shining out of that tetrahedron. As you draw your awareness back through the pentagram that now exists towards the northeast, back into the center, and now 7 of the directions around you, around the circle, each have gates sealed with a pentagram, where your awareness can open or close them. Shining pentagrams at 7 points, and outside them 7 gleaming tetrahedra with the letters Mem, Aleph, Kaf, Aleph, Shin, Aleph, and Nun. And then finally, turn your awareness to the south. See the gate towards the south on your right-hand side. And seal it. Sator arepo tenet opera rotas. Sealing the southern gate with the pentagram. Peering out of the tetrahedron. Crystalline and made of light. Charge it with the energy of the letter Hey. And just feel it. And as the Hey charges that tetrahedron and you withdraw your awareness back through the pentagram, feel the entire series, the entire set of 8 angles clicking together into a whole. All 8 angles are sealed with pentagrams. And outside of each of them is a gleaming tetrahedron with the letters Mem, Aleph, Kaf, Aleph, Shin, Aleph, Nun, He, Makashana, in a great 8-fold star that illuminates the circle and the 8 gates and the 8 pentagrams. And inside the octahedron, filled with light, filled with lamps, filled with the paths of the major arcana and the wisdom of the tarot. And vibrating 8 times, the octahedron outside the circle, connecting everything. Makashana, 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 Makashana. And by this, the Ogdoad is sealed. The 8 gates are established, and the circle is secure. Bring your consciousness to the very center. Just feel the whole network of paths and names and codes and crystals. Feel the security of the circle, the 4 directions, and the 8-fold star. See the wheel of 8 spokes, the symbol of spirit, symbol of the year, and allow it to shrink to the size of an atom and store it in your heart, or let it fade. And know that you can call forth the circle, fully warded at all 8 points, whenever you need it. And so this is how we establish the Hermetic seal on the 8 directions out of the sphere of Hood. And that brings this weekly video to an end, and I hope that this has been of value to you and that you've learned something and you found this helpful. If you're in my course, of course, I hope that you continue working hard and learning. And if you're not in my course, feel free to contact me and ask me any questions. I'm Dr. Peter Duchemin, the tarot philosopher, and this is the Forest of Life Venus calendar. And thank you for watching.